we're investigating a realm that is created by human subjectivity, the realm of social and institutional reality. And yet we're going to be able to get an objective account of that realm, but an account which is epistemically objective. Now, in order to understand that point with any depth, I need to introduce another distinction, and that is the distinction between those features of the world that are, as we might say, that exist independently of any people's feelings and attitudes, that are, we might say, observer independent or intentionality independent. And again, those are, in general, the properties studied by the natural sciences, molecules, the nature of the chemical bond, tectonic plates, and earthquakes are all observer independent. But there are lots of features that are interesting to us that are observer relative, that only exist relative to the attitudes of observers and participants in the activities in question. So it's a physical fact about these things that they will open various doors and start various cars. But that we use them for that purpose is observer relative, that we have assigned certain functions to these objects. The function of being keys is a fact about us, and their existence as keys is relative to the fact that we have assigned these uses to them. The notion of a function, the function that the object performs, is observer relative. We don't discover functions in nature. We assign functions to objects. Now, that fact is disguised from us by the fact that we often discover functions in biology. It wasn't until the 17th century that we discovered that the function of the heart is to pump blood. But when we say the function of the heart is to pump blood, what we're saying is not just that there are a set of causal relations, but those causal relations serve a purpose. If we thought that the only thing valuable in the world was death and extinction, then hearts would be dysfunctional. It's because we value life and survival that we can discover biological functions. So the general point is that functions are observer relative, and that's going to be very important for our investigation, because what we're going to discover is that the fact that you are a student, or that Barack Obama is President of the United States, or that this is the University of California, all of those are cases of assigned functions. It's not a feature of Obama's biology. It isn't in his DNA that he's President of the United States. It is a function that has been assigned to him. But you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, the remarkable thing is this, and as far as I know, human beings are the only species capable of doing this. There are a class of functions where the function can only be performed in virtue of the fact that the participants in the structure, the participants in the institution, the participants in the society in question, have assigned a status to the object or person in question. And it's only in virtue of the... I'll wait for this guy to get past. It's only in virtue of the collective recognition or acceptance of that status that the function can be performed. I perform the function of being a professor in this university. Obama performs the function of being President of the United States. These objects I carry around in my wallet perform the function of money because they have been assigned a status. And with that status, a function that can be performed in virtue of the collective acceptance of that status. I've got some old Confederate money. It looks just as beautiful as this stuff. In fact, it has a certain antique charm. But it won't buy you anything because people no longer recognize it as money. They were nervous when it was issued by the Bank of Richmond or wherever, because it says that they will pay you in gold or silver or whatever at the cessation of hostilities. When the war is over, they'll give you the actual gold or silver. And we'll get to the ontology of money later on. But what I want you to become aware of now is that there And there is in society a remarkable set of functions that are only performed in virtue of collective recognition or acceptance. And I call those status functions. They are the glue that holds human society and human civilization together for reasons that I'm going to explain to you in considerable detail. Right now, we're just talking about some elementary points about the ontology of society, how it differs from the ontology studied by physics and chemistry. And we might say that in general, roughly speaking, observer-independent phenomena are studied by the natural sciences. Observer-relative phenomena are studied by the social sciences. And as usual, psychology falls between the two. Psychology studies both types of phenomena, both the observer-relative and the observer-independent. The interest of this for our present discussion is that anything which is observer-relative has an element of ontological subjectivity, because the subjective attitudes of the observers or the participants is essential to the existence of the object or the function in question. Now, if you didn't understand what I just said in the past few minutes, don't worry, because we're going to go over that in somewhat tedious detail. I've written 2 damn books about that. And you're always embarrassed when you feel, oh my God, I got to write another book because I didn't say what I really wanted to say in the first book. But anyway, the 2 books, here's another problem. If the 2 books are about exactly the same subject, how do you get titles that sound different? Well, the first book was called The Construction of Social Reality. Now, how do you say the construction of social reality in a way that doesn't sound like the construction of social reality? I finally figured it out. It's called Making the Social World. Guess what that means? Same damn thing. It means construction of social reality. Okay, but nobody's going to confuse the two. And you think we're all victims of translators. We are. But we're all victims of publishers. I carefully designed the cover design. I thought it was beautiful. And they brought out that cover in London, but in New York they brought out the ugliest cover you ever saw. That's the one you're going to find in the bookstores. I can't bear to look at it. I'll show you the beautiful one. I'll bring a copy to class of Making the Social World. But anyway, don't get me going on the publishers. The virtue of translators is we don't know how they're raping us. A Japanese friend of mine said, didn't sound like you at all. Well, thanks a lot. I don't speak Japanese. But in any case, I won't give you my complaints about publishers. There are 2 books that I want you to read about this subject, about how we create social reality. Okay, so what have we covered so far? I want to say we need a subject matter in philosophy, which is the philosophy of society, which stands to the study of society the way the philosophy of mind stands to the study of mind, or the philosophy of language study stands to language. It is, properly speaking, a philosophical investigation, though of course it overlaps with the social sciences. It's philosophical because it deals with society in general, and it deals with conceptual issues, the nature of social phenomena. Now, there are certain ground rules of the investigation, and I'm going to tell you what the ground rules are. Okay, now I'm going to catch my breath, take a drink of water, and take time for questions. Now, the way I lecture is this. It's more fun if I can just talk. I feel better. Some people feel more secure if I have notes, and occasionally, every so often, I feel insecure. I'll haul out a sheet of paper and look at it and say, there must be something on there. Anyway, and then talk some more. But then after a while, I'll stop and we'll take questions. And that, for me, is the most important part, because then I know how much is getting across and what things are still unclear and so on. Okay. So let's stop now for questions, and then I'm going to tell you the ground rules of the investigation. Any questions about what I've said so far? Yes, at the back.
So you have said that we can have...
Now, I'm getting hard of hearing, so you're going to have to shout.
You said that we can have epistemic objective knowledge.
Yes.
A domain that's ontological subjective.
Yes, exactly.
My question is that isn't knowledge ontological subjective? It is its own
Yeah.
experience by us.
Yes, knowledge is always in somebody's head, right. But we want epistemically objective knowledge, even though the existence of the knowledge in people's heads and on books and so on is ontologically subjective. This is a bigger problem than you might realize. For years, I was telling people in the brain sciences, you guys have got to get busy and figure out how the brain causes consciousness, the leading problem in the biological sciences today. And for years, quite good neurobiologists would tell me, there's no way science can study that because you admit that consciousness is subjective, science is objective, therefore there cannot be a science of consciousness. Now, all of you will recognize that is a bad pun. Technically speaking, it commits the fallacy of ambiguity because it's ambiguity in the distinction between objective and subjective. Science is epistemically objective in the sense that we seek knowledge which does not depend on the attitudes of the participants, which does not depend on the attitudes, evaluations, or feelings of the investigators. It's epistemically objective. But, and this is the key point, epistemic objectivity is not precluded by the ontological subjectivity of the domain studied. You can have an ontologically subjective domain, like consciousness or society, and you can have epistemically objective knowledge of that domain. That's right. And you're pointing out knowledge itself is a human creation. It's human beings engaged in activities that have to result in these knowledge claims. And why are they ontologically subjective? Because they are the creatures of human intentionality. I'll get to that later when we talk about the linguistic component in all of this and how there is an ontologically subjective element in the creation of any body of scientific knowledge. Now, when you say that, immediately you have some problems. If there's one thing you discover as a teacher over the decades, is that the urge to relativism is never fully stamped out. For some reason, when people get out of high school and start universities, one of the slogans that really appeals to them is everything is relative. They just love that. And at some point, I have to attack relativism because I think it's an incoherent doctrine. But I can't say everything all at once. But in any case, you're absolutely right about the ontological subjectivity of knowledge claims, but it doesn't follow that they're relative or that relativism is correct. I'll refute relativism later. I have a principle. I never refute relativism when I'm suffering from jet lag. Okay, so we'll do that later. All right, any other question? That's a good question. Yeah?
You said that for humans, specifically what holds our society together, the glue, is the fact that we can assign status functions.
That's right.
And you said that we're the only species that can.
Now, I said, as far as I know, we're the only species that can. You know, I don't want to knock the other species. And if it turns out that unknown to us, there are primates that also have university courses and income tax problems and divorces, well, welcome to the club. Okay, I'm not trying to put down lower animals.
So
yes.
Where do you draw that line? Because I mean, you could argue that they have their own societies, their own communities.
Yes.
Versus our higher education.
Okay. No, she makes a very good point, and that is this: where do you draw the line between animal societies and human society? And I'm going to tell you where to do it. I mean, I'm going to tell you in boring detail exactly what the line is, but not yet. I can't say everything at once. What we're going to do is talk about how human beings create this remarkable phenomenon, what I call a status function, functions that can only be performed in virtue of the collective acceptance of the status. Now, why is it such a big deal? It's a big deal because it gives people reasons for action that are independent of their immediate inclinations. It's a nice day outside. I'm feeling pretty awful inside. I'd much rather I just go for a walk or go home and go to bed, but all the same, here I am. Why? The answer is because I have a commitment. I have an obligation. I don't feel good about myself if I don't give the lecture that people showed up to hear me give. Now, how does that differ from my doggy? My dog's wonderful. I'll bring him to class sometime to show him off. but he does not act on obligations, and how he does not. I mean, when you train your dog, what you train him to do is to have the inclinations that you want him to have. What is remarkable about human beings is that they can create reasons for acting which function independently of their inclinations. And that's one of the things that you get out of this institutional reality that I'm going to talk about. However, again, I'm not knocking other species. If it turns out that maybe there are some primates or maybe there are some dogs that actually have this, well, welcome to the club. I don't think that there are. I think what dogs have is not status functions, but they have status hierarchies. So there's an alpha male and the alpha female in any wolf pack, but it's not like being president of the United States. Why not? Well, the alpha male is alpha male only as long as he can beat up on the other males. There is going to be some day when some young male can beat up on the alpha male, and then he loses his job as alpha male. Barack Obama doesn't have to worry. He doesn't have to get up in the morning and think, maybe there's somebody in the White House who can beat me at arm wrestling. It doesn't matter a damn. He's got a status function. Even Bush, I didn't have to worry about, well, maybe there's going to be some guy who can beat me up because he's officially recognized as president. Doggies and wolf packs have alpha males, but it's not a steady job. You don't get tenure as an alpha male. You're an alpha male only as long as you can beat up on the other males. Now, it's interesting. I don't want to trivialize it because, of course, the intelligent alpha male works in collaboration with other males. So he's got a kind of team of friends that enable him to beat up on the other guys. And there's a wonderful man, an American in Leipzig, who studies primates. And I went to visit him. Tomasello is his name. And I saw his primates operating. And they do have status hierarchies with alpha males. But the alpha male maintains his dominant position, partly because he's got allies, got other males that help him out. Okay, any other questions at this point? Okay, so what I've argued then is that we need a philosophy of society that in part its ontology will contain an element of ontological subjectivity. Sometimes you mix the subjective and the objective. So, for example, I'm physically able of driving a car, but that's not enough for us. We want you to go down to the DMV and get a status function. I just had the damn thing renewed, and it's not a good idea to be a philosopher and take those exams. Because it turns out there are systematic ambiguities in the exam that make it not possible to give a correct answer from the choices that they give you. And I had a hell of an argument convincing the lady that, in fact, the wrong answers that I gave were, in fact, right answers if you read the question correctly. However, it pays to be good at arguing. I did get my driver's license. I was going to show it off to you, but I don't want to dig it out now. Okay, now that's a good example of a status function that's mixed. You have to have the sheer physical ability to drive the car, but that's not enough. You just jump in the car and start driving around in California and say, well, I'm able to do it. And that doesn't work that way. In the state of California, you have to have, and this terminology is very important, a driving permit. At some deep level, I regard this as a tremendous decline in civilization. The first time I ever had a driver's license, I was 14 years old, and I was spending the summer in Wyoming, and Wyoming didn't require driver's licenses. Anybody could drive. And you'd see 10-year-old kids driving the cars, the car coming on the other way and no apparent driver. And there's a little kid peering out between the top of the steering wheel and the dashboard. This was great, but they discovered that they had the highest accident rate in the United States with hardly any population. So they thought they would institute driver's license. And the first driver's license I got was by mailing $1 to Cheyenne, and they mailed back a license. I then used that license to trade up for other licenses, and it lasted me until I finally arrived in California 15 years later. Yeah, and had to take a California driving test. But in any case, the general point is that in the case of driver's licenses, being a certified public accountant, being a qualified surgeon, all of those are mixtures of physical facts and institutional facts, because we do require that you be authorized, that you have a status function, and we build that status on top of the physics. Okay, next step. If that's our investigation, if the investigation is to try to explain the ontology of human society, and with all the implications that that has, implications for political philosophy and implications for moral philosophy, what are the ground rules? What are we trying to do? What are the constraints on our investigation? Okay, constraint number one is you can't cheat by postulating any separate ontological realms. See, our philosophical tradition says we live in two realms, the mental and the physical. I would say that's the worst mistake ever in philosophy, but there's so many other bad ones that I don't want to say. I'll say it's one of the worst mistakes in philosophy. And that has been compounded. Some people even say, no, we live in three realms. There's the physical realm, the mental realm, and then there's the social or cultural realm. Culture in all its manifestations, as one of these guys says. And I think that just compounds a mistake. We live in exactly one world, and we've got to explain how money, property, government, and marriage are as natural a phenomenon as digestion and photosynthesis. We cannot say, well, there's a special realm in which they exist, the mental realm or the social realm. No, we've got to give an account that goes from electrons to elections and from protons to presidents and shows them all to be part of the same realm. And then I want to make it tighter than that. It isn't just that we have to show that our account of institutional reality is consistent with our account of physics and chemistry, but we've got to show how if you understand physics and chemistry right, and you see how biology is an application of physics and chemistry, and you see how human mental life is an expression of human biology, then, and you see how human social life is an expression of human mental life, then it ought to be obvious that institutional reality is a natural consequence of much more fundamental physical phenomena. All right, so that's rule number one, is it's got to be, our account has to be consistent. And not just consistent, but a natural consequence of the basic reality of physics and chemistry. Now, that said, let us place our discussion into the much larger context. It seems to me the leading question in philosophy today, and in a way it's the leading question in life, is how do we make our account of ourselves, our conception of ourselves, consistent with what we know about how the world is in fact. I mean, the basic facts about the world are given by physics and chemistry. And by physics and chemistry, I don't mean university departments. I mean ontological domains. I mean the domain of physical particles and their organization into systems. And the basic problem that we face in philosophy today, and it takes many different forms, is how do we account for the human reality, the reality of consciousness and intentionality, the reality of rationality and society? How do we make that consistent with what we know about how the world works anyway? How do we make our account of our mental life and our rational behavior consistent with the fact that the world consists entirely of mindless, meaningless physical particles? Even particles isn't the right word, because we don't know if it's proper to think of these things as points of mass energy, or the latest view is no, they're really like little strings. But the point is, whatever word we decide, big things are made out of little things until you get to the really little things, the subatomic little things. And we have to show how the parts of reality that are interesting to us, like, for example, our own free will, are consistent with what we know about how the world is at the basic reality, at the physical, chemical level. Now, maybe we can't do that. Maybe we have to give up on something. Maybe we'll have to show, or maybe we'll end up showing, that in fact free will is an illusion, that we can't consistently hold. We can't consistently believe in the reality of physics and chemistry and also believe that we have free will. However, that's a tougher conclusion than you might think, because free will is exceptional. It may be the only case where even if you become convinced that it's an illusion, you cannot act on that conviction. You see, think of a real-life case. You're in a restaurant, and the guy comes around and says, what would you like? We got a choice. You can have the veal, or you can have the chicken, or you can have the vegetarian. You get a choice of three things: the veal, the chicken, and this is Berkeley, so they're a vegetarian option. Now, what you cannot do is say, look, I'm a determinist. I know my decision is determined in advance, so I'm just going to wait and see what happens. I'm going to wait and see what I decide. Well, the waiter says, yeah, but all the same, I got to tell the cook something. You want the chicken or the veal or the vegetarian? I'm a determinist. Que sera, sera. You can't do that. Now, why not? Because the refusal to exercise freedom is only intelligible to you as an exercise of freedom. See, I gave a lecture on this in London, and a guy got up in the audience and said, yes, but suppose determinism were demonstrated to be true. Would you accept it? Now, I said, notice the question you're asking. If it was shown, demonstrated, that there's no such thing as free, rational decision-making, would you freely and rationally decide to accept that conclusion? That is, you cannot, Kant knew this, Kant pointed this out to us, you cannot escape the fact that your decisions, that free rational decisions are not like digestion. I can think, well, my stomach's going to digest it or not digest it, but I cannot think that when it comes to making up my mind who I'm going to vote for or what sorts of things I'm going to order in a restaurant, because I have to act under the presupposition that the choice is real. And to do that is to say, I have to act under the presupposition of freedom. So we're in an odd bind with free will, because even if it's false, we still cannot escape the presupposition. We can't escape the conviction. You see, if I become convinced, as a lot of people are convinced, that color is an illusion, and it's really not colored, it's just differential light reflectances, all the same, I can live my life on the assumption that color is an illusion. Okay, so I have the capacity for differential light reflectances, but there's no such thing as real color. But I can't, in that way, live my life under the assumption that free will is an illusion. Okay, so the overall task, the overriding task in philosophy, is to try to give an account of the human reality. The reality not just of money, property, government, and marriage, but of consciousness, intentionality, free will, rationality, society, and ethics, which shows them to be not only consistent with, but a natural consequence of the behavior of physical particles. And that's one of the things I'm going to try to do in this course. See how far we can get with a unified conception of ourselves as part of the natural world. So that's constraint number one on our investigation. Well, constraint number two, really. Constraint number one is you can't postulate any fake realms. You can't postulate dualism or trialism. You'd be surprised how many otherwise good philosophers do that. I mean, Habermas and various other people think there are we live in three different realms. Frege, one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, thought that we had to postulate a third realm. a mental realm, a physical realm, and a third realm. Unfortunately, Frege used the unfortunate expression, ein dritter Reich. That had a rather unfortunate history after Frege died. I won't tell you about that. But in any case, that's cheating. We cannot do that. There's one realm, and we have to give an account of that. This is our second constraint. We have to give an account of the human social reality that shows that it is not only consistent with, but is a natural development from much more fundamental physical principles, the principles of physics and chemistry. Okay, so let's take questions about that. Yeah.
So it seems like if these social realities are physical realms, then there would be access to them in the social sciences. How is what we're
Yeah.
doing not philosophy of social science?
Okay. Well, in a sense, it is philosophy of social sciences because what I'm going to do is talk about the ontology of social reality. I'm going to talk about the underlying ontology that is studied by the social sciences. However, you have to respect people's actual practices. Now, the actual practices are absolutely amazing. An amazing thing happened. The economists got so self-confident about the mathematical sophistication of the models that they forgot the whole thing depended on a whole lot of subjective attitudes, ontologically subjective attitudes of the participants. And so the models, the people got Nobel Prizes for these models. The models were not worth a damn. The whole system came crashing down. And I love the metaphors. One of the metaphors was toxic assets. What people getting indigestion from eating these mortgages? What's the toxicity of these assets? And the fact is, according to the classical economic theory that was widely taught and still is, I guess, being taught, there couldn't be any such a thing for any length of time as a toxic asset, simply because the free market, as they assured us over and over, had too much information. The free market had perfect information, and with perfect information, the toxicity would be wiped away. Well, it didn't work. And in other words, they treated economics as if it were like physics, as if you had a mathematical model of an independently existing reality, and they forgot the whole thing depended on people's attitudes. And we still don't know. I don't know why it collapsed exactly. I can tell you about mortgages and the derivatives, but why exactly did the whole thing come crashing down? And why is it that no economist predicted it? Now, of course, they all say, well, I predicted it. Oh, did they? Well, they predicted in the sense that I did. I could see that the housing market was ridiculous because $1 million were being asked for dinky houses in Berkeley, and now those houses are going for a great deal cheaper than they were a few years ago. But that was not because that the sophisticated models showed that the whole thing was a bubble, but because just common sense, just the ability to see that there was a big disconnect between the amount of money people had and the amount that was being asked for these things. But it seems to me economic theory let us down. Economic theory let us down fairly spectacularly. And I don't have an intellectual grip. Maybe I can get it before the semester's over on what happened. What happened is, in the Great Depression, there was a great economist who tried to cope with the situation, John Maynard Keynes. And he did develop a theory which became the orthodoxy. It was the orthodoxy when I studied economics. That orthodoxy was replaced by another orthodoxy, mostly due to Milton Friedman, probably more than anybody else. And Keynes had convinced people that in order to manage the economy, you had to have fiscal policy. Government spending, government surpluses, and deficits were the key management tool. And Friedman convinced people, no, you don't have to have that. All you need is monetary policy, that the Federal Reserve Bank, if properly managing things, will keep the economy on an even keel in a condition of perpetual growth. it didn't work. And one of the most touching moments was when the former head of the Federal Reserve, I forget his name, I'm suffering memory loss due to jet lag, and he said in front of the Congressional Committee, I can't figure what happened. Most amazing thing. The whole damned economy collapsed. It wasn't supposed to collapse. Well, thanks a lot. Okay, so now we have to get to the bottom of all of this. Now, the social sciences. There's a pecking order in the social sciences, and roughly speaking, who sneers at whom? Basically, the mathematical economists sneer at everybody. They think they are the top of the heap. And there is a Gresham's law in intellectual life where the more technical drives out the less technical. And political scientists who are intellectually ambitious are trying to imitate the mathematization that was typical of economics. So you're going to see more and more mathematical models in political science. Maybe they'll be terrific. I don't know. But I'm just observing that this is happening. So political science is less prestigious. And then you keep going down the intellectual hierarchy. And I guess what? Cultural anthropology is the absolute bottom. It's the literary theory of the social sciences. This wouldn't bother me if I was an anthropologist, but I'm telling you about the pecking order that exists in universities. And the mathematical economists are the top of the social sciences. The social sciences are less prestigious than the natural sciences. But within the social sciences, there's a distinct prestige order with mathematical economics at the top and cultural anthropology down in the basement, down at the bottom. And I would like us to have a theory of society which would show what's right and what's wrong about how to think about social phenomena. What exactly is a mathematical model trying to do? I lecture to people in a lot of different fields, and you suffer from the presuppositions of the field. Typically, economists say, well, according to your model, and I say, wait a second, I don't have a model. I'm trying to state the facts. I don't build a model, I state the facts. They don't know what that means. It sounds crazy to them. There's no such thing as the fact. There's a model. You have to have a model, and the model makes predictions, and then we judge your model on somebody else's model. But the idea that you might just try to describe the phenomenon, that's utterly foreign to their whole way of thinking. Now, my problem with cultural anthropologists, though, is just as bad. Cultural anthropologists think that I'm making incredible generalizations on the basis of limited data. Surely I should go live with the Trobrianders for a while if I'm going to talk about these status functions that I do. How do I know what things are like among the Trobriands? This is just sort of the typical falsity of philosophers who think they can sit in their armchair and tell us about the nature of society when they ought to go live with the Eskimo and with the Quaregs and the Trobrianders and all the other people that anthropologists work with. Well, maybe they're right. We'll see. Okay, but anyway, you suffer from, what happens is graduate school is above all a process of socialization. What you have to do is beat any independence out of the graduate students, and you do that by socializing them into the norms of the discipline. Every society, I gave a lecture about this in French where I said, il faut écraser les jeunes. Every discipline has to have some way of crushing the young. Why? Parce qu'il y a trop de jeunes et ils restent jeunes trop longtemps. There are too damn many young people and they stay young too long. And so societies have different ways of crushing independence out of the young. In Germany, they have a wonderful device. It's called the Habilitationsschrift. And by the time you've been through that, any independence is crushed out of you. Now, we're working on that. We have a thing called a PhD. And it ought to take a couple of years. I was in Oxford where I didn't know about this, and I thought I was taking a long time. It took me 4 years to do my PhD. But it turns out that's much faster than you would ever be allowed to do it in an American philosophy department. So you have to have this long period of socialization where you well, I don't know how we got off onto this. I don't want to talk about this stuff. I want to talk about social ontology. Anyway, the two constraints that I'm insisting are, number one, that it has to be you can't postulate other realms. You have to give a unified account. And number two, you've got to show how it's not only consistent with, but it's a natural consequence of the basic reality. Okay, other questions? Everybody up with us? Now, let me think about some bureaucratic things for a minute. When I came and looked at this room before the term started, there were a whole lot of loose chairs. And I'm sorry to say, when I got here today, they're all gone. I went next door and looked and see if we could get some chairs, but this is not right. I mean, you shouldn't have to sit on the floor. It's bad enough to have to listen to somebody else lecture, but it's I could never do it. But you shouldn't have to sit on the floor. So I'll see if we can get some more chairs, because otherwise the room's okay. I really like it. You got a view outside, and it's got fresh air. It's much more attractive than most of these enclosed capsules, which are academic lecture halls. So we'll stay in this room, if that's all right. But I will try to get us a few more chairs. We don't need very many. 2, 4, 6, 8. Well, yeah, a dozen. If I had a dozen more chairs, it would be all right. Yes? How many people are neither enrolled nor waitlisted? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not very many. Well, if you're assigning a per section, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Well, okay, let me start on the main topic, and then I'm going to stop early today. I won't go. You won't get the full hour and a half. The main element in our analysis is the notion of intentionality, and a remarkable feature about conscious animals is that they have a capacity to relate to the environment by way of the mind. They have a capacity to relate to the environment by way of perception, intentional action, beliefs, desires, thoughts, feelings, hope, fears, and emotions. Now, we're going to use the notion of intentionality rather extensively, so I have to explain what it is. The word is unfortunate because to English speakers it suggests some special connection between intentionality and intending in the ordinary sense, but that's an accident. Intentionality just means that feature of the mind by which it is directed at or about or of or concerns objects and states of affairs in the world. So beliefs and hopes and fears and desires and loves and hates and all of the emotions without exception and perceptions and intentional actions all have intentionality. They're all directed at or about. Intending, in the sense in which I intend to go to the movies or intend to drink a beer, that's just one kind of intentionality. Well, why do we use this word intentionality when it sounds a lot like intending? And the answer is, like most, well, I won't say most, but a lot of confused philosophical notions, we got it from the Germans. The Germans don't have this problem. They use Intentionalität, and that doesn't sound like Absicht. Absicht is a German word for intention, so that no German kid is going to think, oh, well, intentionality, that must mean Absicht. No, I mean, because they don't sound alike. But intentionality in English sounds a lot like intentionality, in which the intentionality of people has to do with their intentions. And, of course, that's just one type of intentionality. So remember that. There's no special connection with intending in the ordinary sense. Intending is just one type of intentionality. Okay, what is intentionality? I said it's that feature of the mind by which it is directed at or about states of affairs in the world. Well, not all mental states are intentional. There are forms of anxiety where you're just nervous, and you're not nervous about anything, you're just kind of nervous. There are even forms of depression where people aren't really depressed about anything, but they're just kind of down in the dumps. I gave a lecture to a bunch of psychoanalysts once, and they said that's our job, is to take non-intentional forms of mental life and convert them into intentional forms. I was reminded of Freud saying that the aim of psychoanalysis is to convert neurotic misery into ordinary human unhappiness. And I guess neurotic misery doesn't have a definite intentional direction or intentional object. Ordinary human unhappiness does. Okay. But now, if that's right, that there are mental states that are intentional and some are not intentional. Similarly with consciousness, many of our mental states are unconscious most of the time. You go to sleep, for example, but you don't stop having beliefs and desires when you're asleep. What is the special character of this intentionality? And there, it seems to me, we can identify certain features of the intentionality. And in particular, I want to say every intentional state has a distinction between the type of state that it is and its propositional content. So, for example, I can believe it is raining, but I can also desire that it should be raining. I have the same propositional content, but I can believe it, hope it, fear it, desire it. All of those are different psychological modes in which the intentional content occurs. Okay, so that's the first feature of intentionality. You need a distinction between the content and the mode. But furthermore, and this is the second feature, intentional states have a different way of relating to reality. Perceptions and beliefs are supposed to tell you how the world is. If I believe it's raining, then my belief will be true or false. If I look out the window and see what seems to be rain, then my perception will either be correct or incorrect, accurate or inaccurate. But not all intentionality is like that. Sometimes I aim not to represent how things are, but how I'd like them to be, or how I intend to make them be. And then I have an intentional state which is not supposed to represent an independently existing reality, but which is supposed to get reality to change to match the intentional state. Now, I think in simple metaphors, and if you think of the mind and language as hovering over the world, then belief will have the downward or mind to world direction of fit. Now, this is a very important notion that we're going to use throughout this course. The notion of how the mind relates to reality, and it relates with different directions of fit. Beliefs have the mind to world direction of fit, as do perceptions. But not all intentional states have that direction of fit. If you think of intention in the ordinary sense in which I intend to go to the movies, or intentional action in which I'm actually trying to do something, then there the aim is not to represent how things are, but to try to change reality so that reality matches the content of the intention. Similarly with desire, when I desire something, my desires don't represent how things are, but how I want them to be, how I would like them to be. So I say that intentions and desires have the world to mind direction of fit. The world is supposed to change to match the mind. The best illustration of this ever was given by Elizabeth Anscombe, a philosopher in Oxford who taught me when I was an undergraduate. And Elizabeth says, imagine that a wife gives her husband a shopping list, and on the shopping list it says beer, butter, and bacon. And the guy goes to the supermarket, and he gets his cart, and he goes around, and he makes the items in the supermarket match the items on the list. He achieves world to mind or world to word direction of fit. He changes the world to match the words. Okay, imagine that the guy is followed by a detective who writes down everything he buys. It needn't be anything sinister. It's an FBI agent off duty just keeping in practice. just wants to keep in practice. So the FBI agent writes beer, butter, and bacon. Now, when they get to the checkout, each has the same list. Both the FBI agent and the husband have the same list, but the list plays a different role. The aim of the husband's list is to change reality by getting reality to match the list. The aim of the detective list is to represent reality by getting the list to match the reality. Does everybody see that? The detective's list is like a statement or a belief. The husband's list is like a desire or an intention. It's supposed to change the world to match the list. And you see this difference very strongly if the detective gets home and he say, wait a second, I wrote down bacon, but in fact, the guy didn't buy bacon, he bought pork chops. He can just put in pork chops. But if the husband gets home and his wife says, you idiot, it says bacon on the list, but you brought home pork chops, the husband can't say, well, honey, we'll fix that. We'll just erase bacon here and write in pork chops. Now, why not? It's a free country. Why can't the husband get off the hook just by doing what the detective did? And the answer is it's a different direction of fit. And with the direction of fit is a different responsibility for fitting. The husband's job is to try to change reality to match the content of the list. The detective's aim is to try to change the list to match the content of the reality. Okay, so we got some important notions now. We got the idea that the mind represents the world in one or the other of these directions of fit. And that looks like it gives us a kind of a neat picture of intentionality, but unfortunately it gets complicated. How about the emotions? What's the direction of fit of pride and shame or love and hate? And the answer is, in those cases, that the emotions typically contain beliefs and desires. If you're proud, you have to be proud of something. There's an intentional content. I mean, people can be proud of all kinds of things. Some people are proud of the fact they got a big nose. Other people are ashamed of the fact they got a big nose. But in any case, there has to be some propositional content, P, and that can be the object of pride or shame. But but not anything will go. You can't be proud. I can't be proud of, let's say, the elliptical orbit of the planets. I'm feeling very proud today. What are you proud of? Well, it's those ellipses. I'm proud of the elliptical orbit of the planets. And somebody says, you're crazy. You can't be proud of the elliptical orbit of the planets. It's no good me saying, it's a free country. We fought for our freedom, and I am free to be proud of the elliptical orbit of the planets. No, because they have nothing to do with me. I didn't have anything to do with it. Now, if I'm Johannes Kepler, I can be proud of the elliptical orbit of the planets because he discovered them. And it's interesting what people get excited about. Ramachandran, the great Indian mathematician, was told by his father when he went off to Cambridge, be proud of the fact that you come from a good family, that you have a distinguished intellect, and never forget that the square root of 625 is 25. Now, I don't know if even Ramachandran could be proud of the square root of 625, but in any case, people do get excited about different things. I don't get excited about the square root of 625, and I'm not sure why Ramachandran was. Okay, anyway, what I'm saying is this. In order to explain things like pride and shame, you have to complicate the analysis to show that these require a complex of intentional state. Be proud that P implies that you believe that P, and you believe P is connected to me. It's got to have something to do with me. Now, as I said, people can be proud of all kinds of things, but there has to be some connection. People are proud not just of what they did, but of what their ancestors did, or what their children did. What their children did. So you can have all kinds of objects of pride, but they have to be connected. And then furthermore, you've got to think it's desirable at P. got to want it to be the case that P. So you've got to desire that P. And I think in general with pride, you've got to desire that P be known by others. And maybe the fact that it's connected to me has to be known by others. People who are proud generally want to show off. They want to show off what they're proud of. Now, within reason, of course, all of this is other things equal. If a guy has a really neat method for cheating the Internal Revenue Service, he doesn't want that known to the whole world. He doesn't publish articles boasting about it, that's for criminal reasons. Okay, and then you get an interesting connection with shame, because shame has many of these same features with a negation. Shame that P implies believe that P and believe the same as here. P is connected. But in the case of shame, it's you desire that not P. So you all know this little squiggle sign means not. You desire that not P, and you desire P not known by others. Okay, so we're starting to get an account of intentionality, which gives us some purchase. The idea is this: every intentional state has a content. The simplest contents are the mirror image of the fact that we have both a sensory nervous system and a motor nervous system. They relate to reality differently. The so-called cognitive states, like belief and a conviction and supposition, are supposed to represent an independently existing reality, and they have this mind-to-world direction of fit, as do perceptions. But other sorts of states, like desires and intentions, do not have the mind-to-world direction of fit. They have the world-to-mind direction of fit. The world is supposed to change to match the mind. Now, I want you to see immediately all of this is going to carry over to language. Statements like beliefs are going to have the downward direction of fit. They're going to have the word-to-world direction of fit. But orders, commands, and promises are not supposed to represent an independently existing reality. They're supposed to get reality to change to match the content of the order, the command, or the promise, and they have the world-to-word direction of fit. Furthermore, now we're going to get a crucial notion, the notion of causation. Many intentional states, the ones that are most important to us, are directly causally related to the environment. So if I have an intention to raise my arm, the intention has to cause the arm to go up if it is to be satisfied. So we achieve the world-to-mind direction of fit. I succeeded in doing what I was trying to do only in virtue of the mind-to-world direction of causation. I succeeded because I was trying to do something, and the trying caused the thing I was trying to do. Okay, now that's an exciting idea, and then when I get that across to you, then we're going to introduce an absolutely crucial notion, the notion of collective intentionality. And when you get collective intentionality, you get intentionality that is shared by people, where it isn't just I have a belief and I have an intention, but we together have a belief and have an intention. And then comes the most amazing social phenomenon, collective emotions. One of the most amazing outpourings of collective emotion was the gushing emotion that people had over the election of Barack Obama. People wept for joy over the election of Obama, and I was wondering how long will it take before they get disillusioned. I mean, I voted for the guy, but I didn't for the moment suppose that this was that somehow all of our that society was going to be radically changed, that there was going to be major social transformation, and it was just a question of time before the disillusion set in. Okay, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's what I want you to remember. We're going to stop now. I'm going to go on with this next time, but here's what I want you to have in mind. All intentional states have a content. The two basic ways in which the content has of relating to reality is the mind to world and the world to mind direction of fit. But those get complicated when you get into the complex structures like emotions. And now comes an essential concept. Since the aim of intentionality is to represent reality, then the representations will either be satisfied or not. And for any intentional state with a propositional content and a direction of fit, there will be conditions of satisfaction. And we can think of the intentionality as essentially a set of representations of conditions of satisfaction. My belief that it's raining represents the state of the weather as raining. My desire that it should be raining represents the state of the weather as something I would like it to be, whether or not it is in fact. But in every case, both belief and desire, the belief will be satisfied if it's true. The desire will be satisfied if it's fulfilled. In every case, you have conditions of satisfaction. So I want you to have these notions in mind. Content and psychological mode, direction of fit, and conditions of satisfaction. And on Tuesday, I'll enrich this whole analysis and show you how you get social intentionality, which is the driving force in society. Okay.